Thank you so much for joining me on this podcast, and I really appreciate your time. I actually wanted to initiate the conversation from COVID onwards because I feel like there's a big gap before COVID and after COVID, and I feel like maybe there are some lessons to be learned from what the scenario, economic scenario, startup scenario, and the development scenario was before the COVID.
Yeah,
But I feel like it is much more relatable for us to understand what happened during the COVID and after the COVID, because that is something that we are going through, and the changes which are going through right now, I feel like it is much more faster than before COVID. So
yeah,
that's why I
absolutely.
thought that maybe we will jump into the situations which are after COVID. Since COVID, global economic situation changed drastically. There are many basic questions which probably a lot of people would raise. But I actually have a relatively unpopular opinion, perhaps. I personally believe that we as a society got used to or accustomed to the drastic changes or the catastrophe that COVID brought to us in a much more faster time period than expected. At least
hmm
what I expected. Do you think the change in the startup scene since COVID, and like I mentioned, that I'm using COVID just as a mark because it was a very significant event in our history, which we are living right now. And do you
Yeah.
think that the change in the startup scene was necessary and a positive one? And if so, how has it been different from before?
Yeah, that's a pretty big question. I'll give some context. So I started my company, Addison Research, in 2017, which was before COVID. We had, steady growth over time, significant in a couple of years. And then in COVID, we noticed that the growth was dropping quite a bit because everything paused, right? So COVID, especially 2020, was a really difficult time for the global in all industries. Globally, economically, it was pretty bad. And then, so 2020 was pretty bad. 2021, people had to adjust. So if they were changing their service to remote technology focus, that's when startups were booming in technology. Technology based startups were significantly doing well, like amazingly well. So tech-based startups did well. Cryptocurrency was doing well as well because again, there was a boom for crypto at that point as well. And then, so that happened for a couple of years. So 2020, about 2021, 2022, we started to notice that things were starting to get to somewhat normal. So when that was happening, anything that was face to face was starting to pick up again. A lot of companies started to have the dollars to spend into research, for example, with my industry. So what we noticed that the whole global economy started to recover around 2022, end of 2021. And then in 2023, it hit again. And what ended up happening is because things were starting to go back to normal, technology based companies ended up losing their value. So you'll see like Zoom was doing really well in 2020 and 2021. And in 2022 or 2023, Zoom started to do a little bit bad as well, right? So we saw that shift. So tech-based companies were doing really well in COVID, post-COVID. Tech companies, they're still doing okay, but not the same level, the same opportunity they had during the COVID time. What you're seeing now is that the companies that are starting up are more focused on agile based companies, right? So they're looking at if they are service based that are face to face, they need to incorporate remote options, virtual options. Virtual companies are adjusting with time. Most people are working from home, right?
Yeah.
Remote working has become a common as well. So tech has become the new normal if you look at it.
Let's look at the startup process from the beginning. Yeah, looking at the vision and concepts, people normally jump into the idea of next big thing, and it gets saturated very quickly. Looking at, for example, AI concept, every
hmm
other person is following the same trend, and everybody is following the AI bandwagon. Is it one of the reasons why businesses are failing, because everybody seems to be doing the same thing? There's not much, so to say, innovation. Like, there's not much difference, and everybody is just doing the same thing, maybe with a little bit of differences, but it's still the same thing.
Yeah. So with AI, I think would be different. I think AI it's a very good industry to be in. And everyone can get into AI, but whenever everyone gets into AI, they do different types of stuff in AI. If everyone's do the same thing, it's not going to work, right? So like when you look at AI, you look at it from like say visual stuff, graphics in AI. You see ChatGPT is like kind of research focused AI. And in market research industry, we have AI in other methods as well that we incorporate. So AI is definitely the new thing where people are moving towards AI and there's a big demand. AI is like the back in the days, the World Wide Web, right? When
Yeah.
internet came about, there's a lot of opportunity, a lot of people became successful. So I think AI has a lot of potential. There's a lot of people get into legal AI. They're getting into it for even carbon emissions, right? Looking at reducing carbon footprint as well. So there's so many different ways. And I do think anyone that's looking into AI should really investigate it from their, I would look at it from their own expertise. Like what value can they bring to the AI algorithm and the AI trend and how they can really support AI within their own industries or their own experiences. So I think AI is special. There's a lot of opportunity. There's a lot of growth, but I do agree that there are people that come into industry and they try to get into with any industry and they try to find ways to start making their own opportunity within, right? So here's how it becomes, right? If the industry itself is extremely saturated already, if you come as a newcomer in the industry and you don't provide any unique value, so unique value is not just adding, changing one little thing and becoming valuable. It's about how do you come into an industry that has so much money where the competitors can just weed you out because they can cut their costs where you're not going to make any money or you'll go into negative? How do you enter an industry with a unique proposition where customers will want to move away from the big players and come to you, right? I think that's a big thing. And you got to figure out what that is for your industry. With my company, when I started, we looked at Asia Pacific region in market research because no one was targeting Asia Pacific. So we built a company focusing on targeting clients in APAC, and we supported them in bringing their research into North America. So we were really considered more of a blue ocean where we came in, we had a unique proposition, clients liked it, we delivered on their expectation, and they felt like they were working with the supplier in APAC. Same quality of service, very good service, same customer service standards. So that brought us into a very unique opportunity in North America to build a business focused on APAC.
But you still started, I think, at very early stages of AI, right?
But we weren't even AI, so that we were never AI. We were just a market research company that came in. What I'm saying about AI is AI is very different, unique because right now it's a booming economy, a booming industry. And so when I started my company, to be honest, I just heard a little bit about AI, but I wasn't really familiar with AI. I've started to learn more about AI in the last 4 or 5 years. To me, AI is still pretty new.
So, when in terms of marketing, then since you started venturing into Asia Pacific until now,
Mhm.
has the
Yeah.
market saturated drastically, or it's still you would consider there's still a lot of competition, like a lot of leverage for you?
Yeah, no, I think the market is not saturated. I think there's a lot of opportunity with clients in Asia. As you know, China's struggling a lot right now with U.S. trade tensions, but there's a lot of movement, right? So Vietnam is considered to be the next China. So there's a lot of opportunity coming out of Vietnam, South Korea, Japan. They're booming economies in terms of the industries they're operating in. India is pretty big as well. So I think there is a lot of potential in Asia, but the challenge with Asia becomes that it's very different from North America, right? So like living in North America, our way of doing things is very different from how Asian clients do things. So if you really want to target Asia, you really have to understand the culture and the challenges that come with our culture and manage that in a way that's going to be cohesive to both parties, to you and the clients.
Yeah, and in Asia,
Yeah,
you have a lot of different cultures, not just one culture. So if you're
yeah,
looking at India, it's a very different cultural acceptance, even when you consider Pakistan. And then if you go towards Malaysia and all these countries, they have very different acceptance towards different things.
yeah. And but even if you look at it from product side as well, right? So like you have China, Korea, Japan that do a lot of international exporting, right? So they take their product, they bring it to North America. But there's a lot of countries in Asia that don't do a lot of exporting like the same level China, Korea, Japan. They do a lot of local work, right? So there's a lot of local opportunity within Asia, and you gotta figure out what that is. So if you're in North America, all the furniture that we own is all coming from China, right? So people are getting stuff from China into North America and even Vietnam, Thailand, and they're selling it, right? So there's a lot of export opportunity from Asia, but you got to have the right network, right, the right contacts, and really build on that.
Yeah. Once you have the vision, once you have decided what you want to do, one of the biggest questions most startups need to answer is
Mhm.
financing.
Yes.
the dilemma whether you want to go big and risk it, or you want to be conservative, you want to have personal financing, you want to get an investor in, you want to have partnerships, things like this.
Mhm.
How do you
Mhm.
see funding in different startups, and what are the misconceptions regarding it which you have actually faced personally?
I think, with financial startup, there's a lot of different ways that you can raise funds, right? One is bootstrapping, the other is, venture capital, VC, and private equity, PE,
Mhm.
angel investors, and crowdfunding. And, crowdfunding is really just trying to find ways to raise funds. So it's similar to GoFundMe, Pay, those type of things. And it's for small parties, right? Angel investors are, people with high net worth that want to just invest, stay away from things, and let you handle things. Venture capital, private equity is a little different, right? So these are people that are not only going to invest in your projects or your initiatives, but they're also going to be engaged very closely as well. So I think with any VC, PE, or angel investors, you have to be cautious about, do you need that type of investment, right? Because you can get a lot of investment. And if you are, how much of your shares are you willing to give to the external investors that are going to enter with your business? Because at that point now they have some decision making authority. So when I started my company, we were kind of bootstrapping. So bootstrapping is starting from bottom up, so from scratch. We had our own personal finances that invested into a company. We built it. We had staff that we hired to help us manage the business that we did. But we were also very cost conscious. We made sure that anything that we did was really focused on cost cutting measures, but ensuring that quality doesn't get impacted. So my business partner and I, we were really overseeing the general operations of the business and make sure things were getting executed at the level that clients expected, but also making sure that financially we were in a healthy position because we put our own money. We didn't take any loans, and it's very expensive to start any startups. I didn't come with a lot of money, so whatever we could invest, we invested, and our goal was to not lose the money that we had. And I think that's one thing that really made us successful, is that because it was our own money, we're very
Mhm.
focused on making sure that our business was successful.
Mhm.
Yeah.
When looking at the scale of the startups and the strategies that you planned yourself, like how you mentioned just now, there are a lot of specific things that any business personality needs to make, whether you are a business partner, whether you are a business owner, or whether you are a CEO of the project or something.
Yeah.
A significant, in
Yeah.
my own experience as well, like I had a few startups myself. Of course, when you are doing things yourself, you don't have like a big team, you're always going to make mistakes, and I did make mistakes when it came to marketing. Maybe when it comes to hiring the right people around me, you always make mistakes. When I ventured into another project as well, it was the same thing. I made a lot of mistakes, and a lot of times,
Yeah.
even though we learn, we still make similar mistakes or same mistakes. Do
Mhm.
you have sort of a guide which you go by when you're probably guiding another startup, or whether you have a stake in another startup? Do you have sort of
Yeah.
a guide for yourself that, like, okay, these are the steps that I need to make sure that, like, okay, so the venture that I'm going to be going in is going to be fruitful?
Yeah, that completely depends. It's very contingent on your situation, circumstances. So I can give you like an example of my startups, right? Like mistakes, right? Let's talk about mistakes and challenges. I think one of the mistakes that I made when I started my startup is that I didn't know anything about the startup world. My ambitions were not to get into startup. I did my undergrad in political science. My master's was in immigration. My thesis was looking at post-September 11 impact on people of color. That's what my thesis was on. My dream was to work in the public sector. I did that. So when I left the public sector to venture out with my own startup, I was very naive. I didn't know what I was doing. My business partner was very knowledgeable because that was
Mhm.
not his first venture. So I went in very gullible. I did not speak up. I was very quiet. I just said, I kind of worked at the start like an employee. He would tell me what to do and I would try to get it done. And that quickly shifted because I realized that that's not the role of a business partner. So I had to quickly understand, because the challenge that I was facing is that I have to now be open and speak out about how I feel. So if I don't agree with something, it's better to voice it. If you're feeling the startup phase where there's power dynamic issues, speak out, right? Talk
Mhm.
about where the challenges are. Make sure you have like a shareholder agreement, those type of legal documents to keep people in check. So now when it came to operations, we made sure that we had staffing that were under us that managed the work that we did, which was a really smart thing to do. So that's just my own experience with startup. Now, when I look at it from an investment perspective and giving people advice for new startups, there are a lot of people that come to me that are trying to raise funds for their startups. And what I notice is that they have all these financial projections and they have really high inflated valuation. And when I asked them, like, where did this valuation came from? They're like, oh, someone looked at our company and gave us a number. And I'm like, how do you back that up? A lot of people come in, they don't have any revenue, but their valuations heavily inflated, right? And I feel like if you want people to invest in your business and you want them to have share, if they're going to invest, they want to make sure that their shares in the company are reasonable and they feel that the money they're putting in makes sense, right? So making sure that you're not heavily inflated with the valuation is really important. For now, businesses that are making profit or are having revenue come in, for those businesses, the advice that I always give is look at your bottom line figure, right? Your EBITDA number. Look at your revenue versus cost and look at what the EBITDA numbers are and identify pain points within your expenses where your numbers may be a little too low, right? And try to back it up. Try to understand what you can do with your expenses to make sure the EBITDA is higher. Because at the end of the day, the EBITDA also makes an impact on your valuation, the multiple that you're in. So when we were selling our company, we had to make sure that expenses were minimal. So we worked on that throughout the year for the past 3-4 years to make sure every year we monitor our finances very closely and our EBITDA numbers are very strong. And that's how when the multiples came in, it made sense when we were acquired. So a lot of startups, the advice that I give them is that if they weren't that they're thinking about those type of things during the early phases of their startup, start thinking about it now and in the future as well. What are some high expense items that you have for your annual cost, and what can you do when a potential investor asks you about why is this so high? What are some strategies that you have in place to help you mitigate those expenses and make it a little bit lower? I think that becomes a big challenge for a lot of startups. And the other thing that I've noticed is that sometimes people have the CEO is not the one that's the most knowledgeable. Sometimes the CEO or CTO may be more knowledgeable. So when you're in a pitch conversation with potential investors, you want to make sure the person that understands that can answer the question is the face of the organization. It doesn't have to be the CEO, and they should be the one that are talking about all the things that they talk about. And the CEO should just be there to answer any question that the person cannot answer, right? And it's also okay to say that I don't have the answer for this, but let me get back to you. I think those are some really good things for a lot of startups forget about because they want to be expert with everything.
You raised a very good point about the evaluation. One question which I feel like a lot of startups always struggle with is to decide when to exit their startup. What is your strategy? When do you feel is the right time that, okay, now is the time that you should exit?
Yeah, that's a good question. So when I started my company, we had in mind that we would build a business and we would sell it, right? So I think that's what kind of made it easy for us. We knew the end result was acquisition and we worked towards an acquisition. So we made sure that, we looked at everything closely and we were getting ourselves ready. The plan was in 5 years, we would look at exiting and then we exited in 4 years. Okay, so we exited early, and here's some indicators that help us understand that it was time to exit early. Our revenue was very strong. Our bottom line figure was also very strong. Finances play a big role in acquisition. Companies, unless they want to buy, they'll only buy a bleeding company if they want to just take your resources and rip you apart, right? But the valuation is not very high. So if you want to sell for a good valuation, what you have to really do is just make sure the bottom line figures are good. So we noticed that the bottom line figures were very good. We had a lot of work coming in, and we were at a point where we did not have the bandwidth to manage more work, right? So we kind of plateaued. And then COVID also hit. We knew that if COVID continues, we don't know what the future is going to look like. So we might not be as successful as we are. So our revenue may drop. Eventually, we may not be able to even run a business, right? So we noticed those type of trends. And we also knew that we added a very unique proposition to the current industry. So at that point, we were ready to sell. Those were some indicators for us to be ready to be able to be prepared to sell. So anyone that's looking to sell, my recommendation is try to figure out, like, are you at a point where you're successful enough? And if you want to scale further, you need the right external support. And if that's the case, then you might be in a good position to sell. Or, are you kind of drained down? Are you not able to do it? And that's okay. If it's too much for you at this point, and you've done enough, you build a successful business, you want to get out, that's also okay as well. But bottom line figures play a big role in your valuation as well.
Before we started our conversation, I was thinking of asking this question, but I feel like the question that I'm about to ask is something which business owners should ask themselves at every stage of the business. How do you find and make the most of unique business opportunities that most people in startup scene might miss.
So unique business opportunity where most startups might miss,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
Okay.
because you see, like, even at the start of your business, when you are starting a new startup, or you need to think that, like, okay, what are the unique possibilities that you have? What is the unique idea which nobody is doing right now? And when you're going through a certain stage, you still need to reevaluate that whether we are in the right direction, or we need to bring a new level to our game or something like that, so
Yeah.
things like.
Yeah, so again, you have some really good questions. So with any startups, identify what your value proposition is, right? If your value proposition is the same thing that everyone is doing, then I don't know why someone's going to come and give you business, right? People want to leave their current provider or their current company they're working with, and they want to go to someone else that can add better value. So you got to figure out what the value is. And something the value is very simple. Something the value just could be like better customer service experience. The value could be like you might speak their language, or the value may be that you understand AI really well, and has penetrated that market, right? So you got to figure out where you add unique value, and you just got to take that opportunity and jump in, right? But there's also other ways too. A lot of people want to be successful, right? And not everyone has to look at like in order for you to be very successful, you have to think about like what is the next breakthrough opportunity that you can create. You could also be successful by starting your own small business, your own small venture. One of my neighbors, I think I was speaking to someone in the neighborhood, they said that this lady had a plastic manufacturing company. So simple, right? Appears to became very successful. And now her and her husband didn't work. So another neighbor of mine has a hotel in Jamaica, and they've done quite well with this hotel in Jamaica, right? So I feel like there's just so many opportunities out there, and don't sit there and be like, my next venture, I need to
Mhm.
become a billionaire. Your next venture is for you to be financially better than where you are today. And once you do that, you've learned what the lessons are for you to be successful in that one venture. So now the next venture you come, then you'll learn from the lessons that you had from your previous venture, you move on to the next one. But let's say you fail a venture. That is
Mhm.
okay. It's okay to fail because you've learned where were your challenges, and you learned where there were some issues where you could have done things differently, right? So you've learned from that, you start your next venture. There's so many people out there in this world that I've talked to that have given me 100 reasons why their startups will not be successful without even trying to do the startup. And what I tell them is that you have so many reasons why you won't be successful. So why do you want to do the startup? They're like, well, I want to start a venture. I'm like, so why don't you try it? And the things that you think will be an issue, deal with those issues one at a time, and then see what happens. And if it's an issue you can resolve, try to get help to resolve. Because to have a successful startup, you have to come across multiple challenges, and you have to answer each challenge, overcome each obstacle, and then you have a successful startup. You can't succeed by just saying that I won't be successful at.
Before we end our conversation, I wanted to ask a personal question.
Yes.
Of all the ventures that you have done, I'm sure you've at least been a partner of a few ventures.
Mhm.
Since I would say, since you started working, or since you started your hustle, has there
Mhm.
been venture which you refused to be part of, but you really wanted to? But you refuse because you know that you cannot do it, but you really wanted to because you know that this is going to be successful.
Oh man, that's a really good question. Yeah, so they're okay. So let me be clear, okay? Addison Research, the one that I started and I was successful, was my first. Well, no, I had a venture before, which was like selling hoodies on Amazon. But again, that's a venture, right?
Yeah,
That was a
yeah, yeah,
venture. I tried
yeah.
that, it didn't, and eventually I'm like, ah, whatever. I broke even. Let's just stop, right? So I'm just giving some context. So
Yeah.
that was my first venture that I
Mhm.
started after my undergrad. Addison Research, we became successful my first big venture. So that started in 2017. We sold in 2021. During that period, I would not focus on any venture because my focus was just primarily my business and to make it successful. After the acquisition, any venture that I've been involved with has been more of like I've invested in this, I've invested in that. So it more kind of investment driven venture.
Mhm.
And then the consulting that I do with startups is more of a side business of mine that I really enjoy doing, which I like. So in terms of the investment that I put in, there is one investment that I really wanted to invest in. And that was a Broadway production.
Mhm.
And I can't really mention the play, but it was a Broadway production, and I had some ethical considerations to keep in
Mhm.
mind. And so, because of the ethical consideration, and then I noticed there's some challenges, the questions that I
Mhm.
had with the person seeking investment, I backed off and I said, this is not the right venture. If I think about it, I really wish I was involved with it because it was a really cool opportunity, but it was just like, it was more of an ethical dilemma. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is that, just my stocks, investments, those type of things, there's a lot of lucrative opportunity to invest in like gambling, alcohol
Mhm.
related, or high debt ratio type of investment opportunities in stocks. And they'll give me a really good return, but then ethically, I'm not
Yeah.
supposed to because of my religious value. So I stay away from that. But again, so anyone who's starting with a startup or anyone who's investing, you got to keep in mind, you can make a lot of money by doing so many different things, but you want to be cautious about your own values and your
Yeah.
own principles, your ethics, and you want to make sure that the money that you're earning, you don't think later on you regret it because you might have made a lot of money and you're like, damn
Yeah.
it, I made so much money, but it goes against my values.
Yeah. I feel like gambling and all that I can understand. And I personally feel like probably you won't even bat a rat's eye on thinking about it too much because you know it is something which you cannot accept. But I
Yeah.
feel like that the Broadway venture is something that is in your heart. If it was a
Yeah.
little bit like this, then I could have gone.
Yeah, no, the Broadway, like my wife and I, we love watching Broadway shows,
Yeah.
right? So for us, it was a cool, really cool opportunity, and I love to play the whole idea of everything with it.
Yeah.
But there were some ethical considerations that
Yeah.
someone brought to my attention that I had to be cautious about.
Yeah.
Otherwise, like I love Broadway. I think it's cool.
Yeah, thank you
Yeah,
so much, Imran. I really appreciate your time, and it was a very pleasant conversation with you. I hope that all the questions were something that you were satisfied with, nothing too dramatic.
yeah, no,
And I hope that people learn something. And if anybody has any questions, I will definitely be throwing back at you. And I
yeah,
hope to invite you again for another conversation, maybe some precise topics in the future.
yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, no, let me know if there anytime you want to chat. I'm happy to. I appreciate you being patient with me as well,
of course.
especially with the move. Right. So
Yeah.
thank you for your patience on that.
No worries. Thank you so much, Imran.
All right.
Um,